Hey everyone, welcome to Zannen Canada. I'm your host Jesse Betteridge. Zannen Canada is a podcast about the many relationships between anime and Canadian media, and every year we have a holiday special where me and a few guests recount our favorite pieces of media that, we've encountered over the last year and want to share with everyone. And 2020 is going to be no exception, despite the fact that this has been a garbage year for everyone in every way. This time around, I have reached the olive branch out towards Zannen Canada's fiercest rivals over at the Anime Roundtable podcast. And three of their hosts have joined me today to take part in this holiday discussion. Mike, can you go first?
Hi, I'm Mike Nicholas. I'm the creator and main host of the Anime Roundtable, which has been in existence in some form since 2006, but it took a hiatus, an almost decade-long hiatus in 2010, and then returned almost 3 years ago in 2018. And really, it's just a current events show. We talk about various headlines in terms of anime and East Asian pop culture. For myself, been a fan since, I would say really went into it in the 90s when I was in school. But it could even date well before that, when CFMT, Omni Television here in the early 80s, aired things like Star Blazers and the Force 5 series.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's where we can really, I can really start to date back when I got my first real exposures. But Robotech kind of solidified things a little bit more. And then in the 90s, discovered it again. That's the short story, I guess.
We also have James. James, can you introduce yourself?
Hey there, I'm James Austin, and it's like I've been into anime probably not as long as you might, but since the turn of the century, and it's been a fun ride. And I'm also a co-host on the Anime Roundtable, and I've been there since the very beginning, over a decade, when Mike just happened to wrangle me into a classroom, and I've never left ever since.
And finally, we welcome back to the show someone who has not been on since the very first episode. It is, of course, Kevin Eng. Kevin, can you just introduce yourself for the folks who were not here for episode 1? And please don't go back and listen to episode 1 because it's terrible.
It's still online, right?
Oh, yeah.
Hello, I am Kevin, and I am the youngin' of the Anime Roundtable. I've been a fan since probably the late 90s when Pokemon debuted on YTV, and I guess I still consider myself a Pokemon fan, but I don't really watch that show anymore. I've been part of fandom for, 20 years or so now. I was a Bionics kid. Didn't really watch Inuyasha until the Bionics block debuted, so it was more so Witch Hunter Robin that hooked me into anime as a medium. Nowadays, I predominantly read manga. I don't watch anime nearly as often as I used to, but I do still consider myself a fan of it.
All right. Excellent. Thank you very much. We're going to jump into our normal holiday media extravaganza soon enough. First, I just wanted to bring up a couple things. So 2020 has been, as I said, shitty in many ways. We have seen a number of shocking deaths take place through the course of the year. And very recently, one of the more shocking ones has come up. And you guys have talked about this on your show a bit because you've had a couple episodes a little more recently than me. But Kirby Morrow very tragically passed away in late November at the age of 47, which honestly kind of came out of nowhere for most people and kind of made big shockwaves just in Canadian media news in general. Kirby Morrow, of course, was the voice of Troa in Gundam Wing, Miroku in Inuyasha, Vaughn in Escaflowne. Mm-hmm. He was a Goku. God, this was really difficult to process. I know that he had actually just recently reprised the role of Miroku in Yashahime. I haven't checked out that dub, but I've heard from people that he sounded very different. And I know I've been getting a little bit of mixed information about the actual cause of his death. I've read some recent articles. Apparently there were some struggles with alcohol. I think this possible this could all be related. There may have been larger health things going on at that time. I'm not gonna say for certain because I don't think it's been fully confirmed. But yeah, it's definitely a big shock for most people despite that. Did you guys have anything to comment on about that?
We mention how much over the last 2 decades English voices have gained their following. And we often make the joke, for better or worse. We won't go to that part of it. But they've helped carry the more recent generations of fans. Whereas when I was getting into it, I gravitated towards the Japanese voices, but there is a clear gravitation towards English voices these days. Kirby would have been amongst that.
Oh, definitely. Like, if you went to conventions back in the late 90s, early 2000s, or no, specifically early 2000s, because Gundam Wing debuted in 2000 in the United States and Canada, like, anyone who was a voice actor on Gundam Wing, especially those principal characters, they were like rock stars at conventions. Just the excitement they generated was crazy. I think it was probably unprecedented at that time. It's more common to see voice actors, draw that kind of energy these days and over the past decade, or the past couple of decades. But Gundam Wing really set the bar for that, and I know that Kirby Morrow was always like really surprised and humbled by that. And yeah, it's just it's definitely sad to think back on that. Again, I know his brother has launched an attempt to create a Kirby Morrow Memorial Scholarship Fund. I'll include a link in the show notes for this. But they're raising money to create a scholarship in Alberta. And it's in a GoFundMe. At the time, they're at about 25% of their goal. If you want to make a donation in his memory. But yeah, I know we can't eulogize everyone on this show because we've seen a lot of unfortunate deaths over the years, and that's obviously going to keep happening. But I thought I'd be much remiss if I did not mention this very shocking news. That said, there's, at the time that we're recording this, some other major news has come out. I've heard a few rumblings about it. Yesterday it was announced that Funimation, in a move that will surprise nobody who's been following this to any degree whatsoever, is going to be purchasing Crunchyroll. There have been rumblings about this for quite a few months. I think even if this didn't happen, the writing was kind of on the wall that with the current streaming services wasn't going to be sustainable. Something was going to give eventually. And surprise, surprise, Sony, the company who wants a monopoly on anime, is one step closer to that. Although I would debate that what they have now is not quite a monopoly, but that seems to be the assessment that most people are kind of jumping to on this.
They got the majority.
If you look at it realistically, they're not even close to a monopoly. And even if you do regulatory things, I don't think the niche of anime, it's just like it wouldn't matter to them and stuff like that. So this will pass through, no problem. But the bigger thing is,
antitrust groups aren't going to care about that.
But the bigger story, I would say, is it's not about Sony buying them and getting the monopoly. It's more of AT&T needs the money to pay down their debt. And this 1.175 billion cash, I guess, will help them just a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't even necessarily mean that AT&T is getting out of the anime game, because they still have some valuable brands attached to them, such as Toonami. And, of course, Crunchyroll had a partnership with Sentai. Who knows what kind of partnerships AT&T will still be open to moving forward, but they recognize the value of the Crunchyroll brand. So obviously with the debts they've accrued from all of their monstrous mergers and consolidations that have been going on. I can definitely see why they would want to cash in on the value that brand and user base has generated.
That's an interesting point, though. You brought up something really interesting. The idea that AT&T may not be out of the anime game. They've decided to sell a big part of their pieces, but that doesn't mean they can't make their own in the future.
That's very true. I mean, we'll see what happens for sure. I wouldn't be surprised if they beef up the Toonami element and even maybe incorporate it into HBO Max somehow. I don't know. That obviously doesn't apply to us because we don't get any of those services in Canada. This also doesn't preclude them working with Sony in the future. Like, they may even still work with Crunchyroll moving forward, even though they don't own them. But obviously it's just, they don't have to manage that brand, which of course comes with huge obligations too, which you could argue that AT&T wasn't really throwing their weight behind to begin with.
Yeah, that's a fair statement.
Yeah.
I do know they still had one co-pro between, I guess, Adult Swim and Crunchyroll. That was supposed to be a Crunchyroll original, so that's still going to happen. So as you said, that can happen in the future. And
Technically, all of those Adult Swim originals, and I think there's currently 6 have been announced, and there's more slated for the future. I think there's at least 10 lined up. The current arrangement is that all those are going to be streamed on Crunchyroll. Whether or not that's going to play out for all of them, I guess is not so certain. But those projects are definitely going to complicate things, and there will be many complications for years to come. Obviously, we're all assuming that Crunchyroll and Funimation are going to be merged together into one service. But I think realistically, even if Sony does gain control of Crunchyroll, we're looking for at least a year where those services are separate. Even when the ownership begins. And consolidation is going to be messy. It's going to take them a long time to figure that out. Not to mention that Sony has been trying to get Aniplex and Funimation under one roof and merged together, and they're basically not playing ball with that. They haven't gotten it to happen because they don't want to work together that closely.
Well,
they're quite
that's
they're
started to see the ball rolling.
Like it's like a bunch of development teams all, at each other's necks sometimes.
Yeah. But of course, obviously you have more redundancy going on between Funimation and Crunchyroll. So, and the worst part of this, of course, is that a bunch of people are going to lose their jobs.
I know. I'm reading some tweets, reading some ANN related tweets from ANN personalities and Justin Savakis. They're worried. They have friends in those companies, and they're worried about them.
I do. So I'm concerned about that.
I could see it, but yeah, it takes time for these things to get together because they're still merging all their operations under, I guess, the Funimation group or whatever they're calling it now for the Australia, New Zealand wing of Madman. Then you have Manga UK, you have Wakamin, and all these others. But now you have Crunchyroll to add to the mix. But I think Crunchyroll, the big thing for them is this gives them a bigger footprint outside of the English-speaking zone, because that was the thing they were going to try and work on, was moving into Latin America and South America with Mexico and Brazil, which Crunchyroll already has its hand in. They've also done dubs in other languages that Funimation hasn't done, like German, Spanish, and it just goes on and on. So
I'm not very optimistic about that, to be honest, because Funimation has made like some half measures to expand into Brazil and Mexico lately, but they have been very disappointing so far. They are not getting that level of outreach that they had promised in prior months, or years for that matter. I don't understand how a company backed by Sony can have so much difficulty having a proper international footprint, but Funimation finds a way. And if Funimation does like kind of fully absorb Crunchyroll, I wouldn't be surprised if Crunchyroll's international presence isn't really adapted well to the way Funimation does business. Again, that's impossible.
Yeah,
at this point, I'm just really pessimistic about the way Funimation handles anything outside of English speaking territory.
And that's a general sentiment I've heard from Latin America, from fans in Latin America, that they have no hope in Funimation and stuff like that. And they said, you better just keep what Crunchyroll's got going and roll with it. But who knows what'll happen, right?
Also, like Jose Argumedo, who works at CNN, has been on this show before. He's mentioned on Twitter that from his understanding, a deal like this is not going to include any tech or any existing platforms. It is branding and IP and user base. So this means that Funimation is just going to absorb basically the IP and subscriber base and not use anything that Crunchyroll has built up. That seems to be what that's what he's indicating. So that's where I'm placing my expectations.
Interesting.
Well, as they say, I guess time will tell, but we're at least a year out before we see, I guess, the first beginnings of whatever happens. So it's a long road ahead. Yeah,
it's worth noting that I think if we're looking at Canada and the US, there will definitely be a number of benefits. For one thing, this might actually increase, assuming that Crunchyroll is folded into Funimation like we expect. This would actually increase the back catalog that non-subscribers can access. Because as of right now, Crunchyroll, Canada is the only country in the world where Crunchyroll does not let Canadians access the back catalog unless they are a subscriber. Funimation does not let all of their titles be accessible to non-subscribers, but they let some episodes at least. They give access to some episodes and some content. So if you're in the US or other countries, you're going to be seeing less access to things than you get with Crunchyroll. In Canada, we're going to get more. So I guess that's one optimistic way I could spin this. But then, I mean, there's also the question of, in those countries where Sony's already kind of cornered the market, and with Crunchyroll just kind of being an outlier service, are they just going to absorb everything? And if they do, are those regions going to get Crunchyroll, or are they going to get, are we going to see Anime Lab still around? Are we going to see other services like that? Hey, in Canada, are we still going to have Wakanim for French speakers, or like all three of the services, Funimation, Crunchyroll, and Wakanim, all going to be merged into one? I mean,
we'll find out.
We'll find out, I guess.
Maybe, and who knows? Maybe they'll include offline viewing.
See, that's another thing I wanted to bring up. Funimation has offline viewing as a base feature for subscribers. Every subscription service in existence virtually, or that has offline viewing options, has it as a base service, except Crunchyroll, which makes you pay for a premium tier, specifically for the ability to download content. Oh. And that also leads to another thing that's kind of been discussed a little bit, and something we've alluded to on this show in the past, especially when Carl and I endlessly talk about this, is that people are talking about how this is going to lead to less competition with these services merged. But from a consumer's perspective, you could almost argue that there hasn't really been competition going on. All the competition is going on in the licensing end. No competition is going on at the consumer end, at the subscriber end, for the people who are actually watching the content. We've just watched these services become garbage over the last 2 years. I mean, Funimation's PS4 app is awful. Crunchyroll's Roku app, they finally fixed it with the recent update, but it was basically unusable for almost an entire month after the most recent update. The navigation is not really great on any of them. Again, no improvement in performance at all. These are the things that if the services were truly in competition with each other, or cared about actually competing with each other properly, we'd be seeing improvements. They'd be fighting for an audience. But all they do is just fight over content and exclusivity of content. And that just drives everything in the wrong direction.
Yeah, they're just fighting over a small pond of the same people, and it's just going nowhere.
We all hate a monopoly, but this could drive things, like, at least drive the bidding wars in the background down a little bit. It could even open doors for, other services like High Dive, maybe even other services that haven't even launched yet will have opportunities with licensing costs coming down.
Who else would compete, really? It's just probably Netflix and Amazon, because Sentai is barely a competitor at this point.
But I mean, that's because they've been priced out of the market. But if you don't have Crunchyroll and Funimation bidding all the time, then it could be easier to get it.
Deals could be had, I suppose.
They're going to be able to get the B titles and the C titles, but the A titles, we know where they're going. So
yeah.
And the other thing is, a lot of them are now going and getting a seat on the production committee even more for the past year or so, and we've seen that with Funimation and Crunchyroll.
Yeah. Again, it's the competition going in a more questionable direction, when these services should be competing based on functionality, not on what exclusives they can get. That just ruins the whole thing. And also keep in mind, like, when you go online and you see people in comment sections talking about Funimation acquiring Crunchyroll, you keep seeing this thing about censorship coming up constantly, which I think anyone who follows this closely knows is ridiculous, because the idea that Funimation of all companies would censor like nudity or anything like that from anime is absurd. If anything, they have been very good about trying to maintain and push that element of many shows, despite what a lot of people are saying. But
the other thing is who you kidding sometimes.
Yeah.
It's not as if you're pulling the wool over anybody anymore. So you're insulting their intelligence.
Yeah. But the funny thing is that when you press these people on what they're talking about with censorship, and they start giving you examples, they're not even talking about that. They're talking about things that they consider quote unquote political lines, like that reference to Gamergate they put in the dub for Prison School a few years ago, or some translator did, or that questionable line they did in Kaguya-sama season 2. I don't even remember what that was, but they're claiming that this kind of thing is censorship, which is like another weird kind of double speak that they're trying to suck people into. It's all right-wing conspiracy bullshit, basically.
Yeah, there's some of that, and I was thinking as well, Jesse, the other one I hear consistently is interspecies reviewers, and then the other thing is, even though it's a separate entity within Sony, is the video game business, and they talk about censorship from that end, from Sony on top, and we've seen that in certain games, but it's few and far between, and they don't do that on the Funimation side. But
exactly. Hey. I mean, that's the nugget of truth behind it, is that when Sony Interactive Entertainment's headquarters moved to the States, that actually did result in the censorship of some sort of anime-based games in Japan. Where you didn't see the same censorship happening on like the Switch or PC or other platforms. That has been conflated with, this controversy over certain line translations in Funimation, which is conflated with the whole Vic Mignogna thing. And it's all kind of regurgitated into all these people who don't actually know anything about these companies or care about anime, just finding an excuse to harass people online. And that's how they suck people in, with this insinuation of censorship. I don't know, man. It's fucked up.
Yeah, there's a lot of that, and there's a lot of what we talked about the reliability of their apps for Crunchyroll and Funimation. And the thing, going back to what you quickly saw on that, what I chuckle about is, remember last month when the PS5 and the Xbox Series X came out, they made a big thing of saying both Funimation's app and Crunchyroll's app would be there day one. And you just scratch your head, and I said, I wonder how functional it'll be.
If there is more consolidation going on with companies and with anime streamers in Canada and the US, this also makes it more important for, our homegrown streamers like Crave or CBC Gem or those companies to start getting into anime, because it's more important to fill that hole, especially since there's a lot of distributors from Japan who, aren't necessarily going to play ball with the new Crunchyroll Funimation merger. If anything, this could just like the companies that are more likely to have supported Daisuke in the past, or to put stuff on Hulu or US only services like that. It's just gonna push them to keep doing that more, I think. And, so it's more important to have that, have someone who can fill that void in regions that aren't the US. Something to think about.
But when I think of it too, if they're looking at content in that as well, another thing that you could think about, and it was way back in the Bionics days and stuff like that, because I remember the little Canadian flag, even though it was Japanese anime, because it was done at Ocean, they said, oh, it's kind of Canadian content. So you could have that factor in too, if they could get some dubbing back to Canada. But that probably won't happen, of course, given the way it's trending. That's
a pipe dream. You're lucky to have gotten the Vancouver voices in that first episode of Yashahime.
Oh boy.
which is a LA dub, as I'm sure many people are already aware, which is highly disappointing. But anyway, let's move on from that, because there's going to be plenty of time to discuss that in the future. Move our sights back to the previous year, where it's certainly been an interesting year for media, and I think our habits have changed in a few ways. But I'm sure all of you didn't have too much trouble thinking of 3 things you want to highlight that you enjoyed this year. And we'll just go around the table, each person. Mike, why don't you go first?
So you want me to go with all 3, or
all 3? It's if we have one person give one item at a time, it's a total mess. We've tried that before. Please don't make me edit that.
Most of 2020 for me was discovering things that may have already been there for a bit, but then maybe updated in a certain way. And in many ways, they kind of came back to the heart of the matter for 2020, which is the pandemic. In many ways too. So my 3 items, as they came up, were Terrace House.
Oh yes,
yeah, Terrace House, and I'll go into detail on all 3 afterwards.
There was a whole season of Terrace House that started this this year,
Or
right?
actually climaxed in the most horrible way, and we can get into that in a couple seconds.
Of course.
The second item was me discovering the Yakuza video game series, and as I said, we'll go there later. The third was more of an event, and that was Anime Lockdown.
Yes.
And you'll hear me out when we talk about all three. When it comes to Terrace House, it was like, the thing was, I didn't get a chance to see the most recent season, Tokyo 2019-2020, I think it was called. And obviously it got cut off because, as many of you know, it got cut off at the outset of the pandemic, and then it got canceled after the apparent suicide, or after the suicide of Hana Kimura, who got cyberbullied for some of the things she did on that show, or some of the events that happened on the show.
More importantly, the way the producers had pushed things.
That's probably the key thing, right? Yeah, because, the producers really did go out of their way to make her look like the bad guy. And it worked. Badly worked. So, in many respects, and as I said, the pandemic didn't help it, because in many respects they kind of aggravated a lot of it. So there are talks of cyberbullying and mental illness. And the thing was, for me, I also ended up watching, beginning to end, the season before that, Opening New Doors, which was set in Nagano. And I kept saying on our show that a lot of the tone that would eventually take down Terrace House in the next season, you start to kind of see that tone develop itself in the latter stages of the season before, when they had a very polarizing housemate come on. And I'm not going to spoil it any more than just that. It's just that this housemate got a really bad rap as well, and everybody piled onto this person, including the commentators, who really probably didn't help matters in terms of Kimura herself too. So I started to kind of see that from the outset. And after all that, after Kimura's death, I think it was Fuji TV that airs it in Japan. They had the show also on their own domestic streaming services. They completely pulled the show. Netflix kept their episodes of the current season on for up until recently. I found out at the end of August, they took out the episodes that had Hana Kimura, and that was more than half the season. So what's left is only the first 19 episodes of the most recent season of Terrace House Tokyo. So, and that was next on my queue. But knowing it's been cut off, there's really no point in watching it anymore. And I fully understand why. The other thing about the Terrace House story was Kimura's death happened at around the same time as Zach Birchie's death. They happened 3 days apart. And so coming back to the whole mental illness parts of it, because that sadly, that's seemed to be things that came up when we talk about Zach. That's what it sort of made me reflect on. So that's why that's why the Terrace House thing stuck out with me so much when that happened back in May. Okay, Yakuza. Yakuza made me reflect on the return of the Japanese-ness of video games for me. It was the first time I really started to think about a video game really being set in Japan. But I know there's others. I get it. It's just that this one has had a lot of legs, and I only played the first two games in Zero and Kiwami, which is the remake of 1. And obviously that's been the highlight for the series this year was the 7th installment of the series.
Did anyone has anyone played the 7th one yet?
I haven't.
No.
I haven't either.
No, I haven't.
I know it took a big turn and they wanted to do something different with that. They talked about the RPG elements, I know.
Yeah, it follows the Dragon Quest structure, basically, from my understanding.
And it's been, reading forums on it, it's been a big hit with its diehard fans. But as I said, it comes back to the whole Japanese-ness of it. And then it made me reflect also on Sony themselves. Since this was up until recently one of the bigger titles on PlayStation because it was exclusive, and we've had this conversation about Sony wanting to leverage their anime side a little bit more, and obviously we just touched on it with their acquisition this week. But
that's kind of funny because if anything, Sony's identity has changed so much in terms of how they are with video games. like back in the PlayStation 1 and PS2 days, like they were defined by their weird Japanese games. They kind of embraced the Japaneseness of things that normally would be more localized. And especially as I talked about earlier, with the controversy with the so-called censorship going on with some games, it involves some censorship, but I think the bigger issue is that it's just general Americanization of the way they approach the business of gaming and the way they present themselves. And I think a lot of people, a more rational way, don't like that. Obviously, it mutates into something toxic for a lot of people, or people exploit that for toxic reasons.
To me, it was more like Sony coming back to it because they know that's a strength. They could use that as a strength.
But I mean, also this franchise has been around so long too, and it's just in the last few years that it's kind of become big in the West, and like arguably, like probably Sega's second largest franchise after Sonic the Hedgehog in the last few years as well. And actually, now that you kind of bring attention to that, maybe part of that is because it's filling that void of the lack of just sort of Japaneseness in modern video games. That and Persona, which is also still a PlayStation exclusive.
But when we say that, actually, Jesse, to quickly point out, some of it, because it was with Sega for the longest time, but once Sega acquired Atlas and stuff like that, and the Atlas USA people came on board and they took over Yakuza, they just went full on and just gained new fans, and they gave it that shine and polish it just didn't have before.
That probably helped, yeah.
They really pushed it, and they brought people in, their fans and stuff like that. And it was like this word of mouth, and they started to grow again and stuff like that. And they had a singular vision to unite all those games because they were all coming one after the other. It wasn't like, is the next game actually going to come out?
Well, in many respects, they embraced it, Atlas, in redoing the localizations. Okay. The third one is Anime Lockdown itself. And Anime Lockdown's success back in May as well kind of set the tone. It wasn't the first one. I get it. It wasn't the first, it wasn't the first online convention or online fan convention. The positive buzz it generated proved the feasibility of the concept of an online fan convention. And JP, when we talked with him, the guy who is behind Anime Lockdown, he has an all shucks attitude to it. And he's still blown away by what that did for a lot of people. I think it was the first, in many respects, it was the first together moment I think fandom had in North America when lockdown happened. So, and as I said, it set the tone. It set an interesting blueprint that, well, all the brand name conventions have now followed, and they've done their own versions, whether it be the Expos, the Norths, the Funimation and Aniplex having their little things, and Crunchyroll Expo. But to me, it really started to prove itself feasible in terms of Anime Lockdown. And now, sadly, or maybe not so sadly, personally, I'm at the point of suffering multiple versions of post-convention syndrome. So there's so many I can't keep up, and that's why James and Kevin are actually pretty good at keeping up with them compared to me.
I have to say, one of my most cherished memories of this year was being able to enjoy anime burger time from the comfort of my own home while eating. That was so great.
I think that was the great thing about that. In some other conventions, they brought some presenters that you wouldn't normally see at every convention in North America, Europe, or Australia, or wherever. And they were able to come into your own home. And it was great for people to experience that for the first time, whether it was Anime Burger Time, whether it was Mike Toole's Dubs That Time Forgot, and so many others.
In many respects, too, when, what was it? Around the same time in May, or a couple weeks later, Anime Hell happened as well. They did, Dave Merrill did a virtual version of Anime Hell
on Facebook, and it had an infamous technical error in the middle that set it back by nearly 20 minutes.
Yes, I remember.
And you had to watch that whole
thing. No one knows.
All over again.
It's part of the show. It's part of the show.
Yeah, and Well, the thing was there was that moment of togetherness because everybody who I knew about in terms of fandom and sometimes in anime journalism, they were out there. And coincidentally, that was also around the same time as Zach's death. So, you saw a few ANN personalities actually come in to watch the stream as well. I remember seeing that because I remember seeing Lindsay and Bamboo show up for that. And I saw them make themselves known in the chat, and all I could do was think about how much they were hurting that day. So, as I said, lockdown that kind of started to draw, tighten the fan community in a good way.
Yeah, I'm curious. Are there any other online convention apart from the Anime Hell event that happened on Facebook? Were there any other online cons that you guys thought were particularly successful?
I wouldn't say successful, but the one that caught my attention of the industry ones, I was really impressed with Anime Limited's anime Cloud. What was it? It was Cloud Matsuri. Now,
Cloud Matsuri, I think of the industry ones, that was definitely the best.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately, the first one was region locked. We couldn't get that in Canada, but the second one, a few weeks ago, they learned their lesson. They said outside of Asia, everyone can watch it. And they had some great presenters. They also had a wonderful documentary that's up on the Anime Limited YouTube channel on Cyber City Uedo. And it tells the story from the UK perspective, and it's an incredible journey on that one.
For me, it was the Anime Expo one.
It was funny though. I'll ask you to go. You should go elaborate afterwards. It's just I just remembered Expo, Aniplex, and Funimation all happened in the same weekend, more or less. So,
yeah, go figure.
Yeah,
and some of them shared content, I believe, too, right? So,
what was about Expo for you, Kevin?
Well, I got to see some of my favorite singers perform. That was the highlight of my weekend.
That concert at the end, I saw the last couple acts. That was fun to watch.
It was Kotoko and Elisa were the 1-2 punch for me.
Well, and then what did it for me was seeing Cruel Angel's Thesis be performed yet again. But those are my three.
Great. And also Adult Swim Festival was online this year. And that's not an anime convention, of course, but they had some pretty great content, which is all they posted it all on YouTube, which I thought was that was great to see. All right, well, James, why don't you go next?
Okay. Well, I guess I'll probably do mostly anime for my picks and stuff like that. I guess in no particular order. The ones I saw was The Great Pretender, which was on Netflix, and I watched that with some people for a streaming party, and it was a fun one, both sub and dub, and it's kind of weird for that one too, but I'll get into it later. The other one was Arte, which was streamed by Funimation in the spring, and that's about a Renaissance woman who's becoming an artist. And then the other one, actually, I think it's hard to pick, but between two movies, the third Fate Stay Night Heavens Feel movie Spring Song, and then the third Made in the Abyss movie, which was Dawn of the Deep Soul. So, but I guess we'll start off with the first one I said, Great Pretenders. So that was a Netflix exclusive, and it was really interesting. So they put it up into different arcs. And the different arcs were the Los Angeles connection, which was set in Los Angeles. They had Singapore for the next arc. Snow of London was set in the UK. And then the Wizards of the Far East, the last arc, which was between China and Japan. But it was about this group of conmen and stuff like that go around the world and their journey and stuff like that through these 4 arcs. And it's a very international cast. You have the Japanese con man who thinks he's all that, and then he gets swindled by this Frenchman, and they go on this journey to LA, and he becomes a part of his team, whether he wants to or not. And they all have their own story through these 4.
I mean, I have to mention that I'd been watching it on James's recommendation, so I just finished the Singapore arc a couple days ago, and I've taken a break. Because I watched Ip Man.
And I mentioned kind of Ocean's 11's vibe and stuff.
It has that vibe. It has that smarmy vibe to it in a good way. And I was a fan of the Ocean's 11 movies. So it's a smart it's a smart show in that sense.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed what I've seen so far of A Great Pretender. I'm not through it yet. I've heard a little more criticism leveled at the second half of the series compared to the first. James, do you have any thoughts on that?
Let's see. I don't want to say anything because it kind of ties them together, and I know it has to do with the Wizards of the Far East, and it kind of deals with the main character and how there's a deeper connection between him and the Frenchman. So, Laurent, but I don't want to say anything because it could kind of be spoilery, but
All
I
right,
just kind of went along with the ride. I was more like, okay, this is Bond, this is Ocean's 11. I'm just going to enjoy it. I'm not going to go anywhere deeper. So I just was along for the ride, and it was fun. And the animation was by Studio Wit. It was beautiful. It was really weird because someone told me it's kind of like this Renaissance painting like feel. And then when I started watching it again, like, or while I was watching it, I kind of did get that vibe, this watercolor vibe or something like
It
that.
takes a really unique approach with backgrounds.
Mhm.
I like it a lot.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, it had a nice feel to it in that sense. But as we mentioned, if you like Ocean's 11, if you like Now You See Me, like those caper type movies,
But I know
it's worth watching. It's worth a consideration anyway.
Ooh, I do want to watch it, to be honest.
the other
Yeah.
thing is you can either watch it sub or dub. So it's interesting about the dub is the NYAV dub by Michael Sinter-Nicholas. They went all out on casting and they did some different interesting choices. Like when they're in Japan, they're speaking in Japanese, didn't dub it. And then when they go to certain places, it's like you have the English, you have actors when they're in the Chinese settings speaking in Chinese and stuff like that. So they did the casting. It feels very international, whether it's in Japanese or in English, because in Japanese too, the same thing was happening. And you don't get that often. And I think they did a good job. It wasn't like English or anything like that. And the other feeling I got, just to cap off on that, is that we talk about Netflix and anime and stuff like that, and people are saying, well, they're taking away the Japaneseness and all this stuff, and they made deals with some of the different bigger studios, and some of the bigger studios said, well, we're going for the Netflix audience, all this stuff, and I can kind of see that here, but I still think it's a great show overall for any viewer and stuff like that. They just want to sit down and have a good time and stuff like that, and all the arcs are nice and digestible, the 4 arcs.
Well, to me, it was getting back to the whole, like, yeah, there's a thought that comes to the Netflix article from a couple weeks ago, but maybe on a more humorous note, and we've talked about the Netflix article en masse, so maybe put that aside for now. On just as a more lighter note, Great Pretender's ending theme song is the actual song, the cover that was famously done by Freddie Mercury.
You mean that song that Netflix keeps telling you to skip?
Or you have the option to anyway.
You know what's crazy? I said all those things and I forgot to mention the one thing that's in the title too. And that was funny too, seeing that ending, because if you watch the ending, it basically is inspired by that Freddie Mercury music video, except with cats.
Yeah, it's they essentially recreate much of that music video with the cats. And as a more lighter note, it used a song that had been out there for years as its closing song. Much like "Fly Me to the Moon." I don't foresee the actual song "The Great Pretender" getting to the same level of newfound popularity because of this anime, like what Eva did for "Fly Me to the Moon." Because I think it's another time, it's another era to me. But it would be funny if we see a little bit of more popularity now or a little bit more attention to the song itself now amongst fandom. I doubt it'll happen though.
Yeah, I mean, the money and resources that went into producing that ending theme just gives me hope that maybe ending themes aren't going to die as a result of a bigger shift towards streaming.
Well, the thing is, the Annie song is still a thing. It's still a big business for Japan too. For Japanese music,
still got to sell those physical CD singles.
Yeah, the theme songs have become a bigger part of the ecosystem there.
But I guess I can see where it could come from on that one, because I remember the beginning didn't really have an opening at all. It was just kind of, here's the title card and away we go. So I guess time will tell, as streaming is the future, as we know. The second one, Arte, was in the spring season. It was based off a manga. And basically this one is about, it takes place during the Renaissance era in Florence, Italy. And it's about this 16-year-old girl, Arte, and she basically is a noble in there and dreams of actually becoming an artist, which is kind of hard being a noble. And so she actually tries to make her dream come true and basically renounces because her father has passed on and her mother said, okay, you got to go and get married. And she's like, no, I'm going to become an artist, and actually walks away and goes into Florence, and everyone rejects her except for one man named Leo, who takes her on as an apprentice, and like her journey to be accepted as an artist in Renaissance Italy, which is obviously, as you know, pretty much impossible given how women were treated at the time and stuff like that. But her journey as she gets accepted through them, and then as she grows her profile as an artist, because she does go to Venice as well as another setting later on in the series and stuff like that, where one of the nobles brings her on to tutor his niece, and she also does some portraits for them. And as she goes and does these later on, which isn't in the anime, it's in the manga, she comes back and becomes renowned for her style of art and stuff like that. But it's the new battles of, oh, you're just the woman painter that does this certain style of art and stuff like that, which is interesting. So, but the series is fun. It's 12 episodes, and it's a slice of life story. And from a historical aspect, it was interesting, as they definitely did their work and stuff like that on how the people were interacting with each other, the costumes, so it was all there.
I haven't heard of this, actually. This is the first time I've heard of this title.
Yes, so one sec. The original manga, if I can find it quickly, was done by Kei Okubo. And so and that one actually is in English. Mangamo has, I think, the first couple of volumes so. And Arte is spelled A-R-T-E. So, but it's a fun slice of life. It's a fun historical one. I guess probably the other reason that I liked it as well as I enjoyed some historical pieces like Emma. I also enjoyed
Emma's great.
Bride's Tales. So if you enjoyed those, you're definitely going to enjoy Arte, or if you just enjoy history in general, of course.
Those sound up my alley, having enjoyed both of those titles.
Yeah, I've heard good things about Arte. I have not checked that show out. So
I'll type it down for sure.
Anyway.
Okay.
So finally, the last one, just to make it quick and simple, and because they're the big ones, I'm sure most people, I would say most people would have tried to see, but unfortunately, because of theaters shutting down, one of them you could see virtually, one of them you couldn't. And that was Made of the Abyss, Dawn of the Deep Soul, which was available digitally. Thank goodness for Sentai that they were able to, I guess, work something out with the licensor on that one. So I watched that in a watch party with some people because it was $19 American to get the right to view it.
yeah,
And
perfect party movie.
yeah.
It's not a party movie.
Definitely when we got together with the people that were doing that viewing party, we said everyone had watched the first series and they knew what they were getting into for this movie, because remember, this movie had the higher rating and there definitely was a lot of adult content and with it was more the one character, Perushka, the younger, she's like a very younger character, and how the main antagonist, Rondrud, who quote unquote is her father, treats her and stuff like that. And so it definitely is squeamish. Like I would agree completely with that. But it's like on the whole, it's still an enjoyable experiencing watching it with the main characters, Reg, Rico, and then Nanachi, and them trying to transverse down the abyss, down this hole, that this journey we started in the TV series. And that the other key thing to this movie is creating the white whistle and how these white whistles are created. And I can't even say how it's created because that's a very big spoiler, but it continues on with the series where you originally see the art style and stuff like that in this first episode. It's like, oh, it's like Ghibli. It's nice. It's like these nice, happy people and stuff like that. And then the real shit hits you. It's like, oh, this is some serious things going on to all these people. They're living in a real lived-in world here. It's like nothing is easy. Nothing is, the sun's shining down. As you go deeper into the abyss, it gets a little darker, right? It's like you got to work a little harder.
Yeah, this movie was relentlessly bleak. I thought it was very good. Actually, I can see why they chose to do it as a movie for a number of reasons. There's about as much story that could have been used to fill an entire season of an anime in this, but the story I think functions better as a film. Although I will say, like, I don't say this often, I think it actually could have been a little longer. Cause it feels like it's at times that it was just kind of jumping from plot point to plot point and just trying to make sure they got through that story in that 2-hour, window. But I really think it would have been better if they could just draw things out a little bit, make things hit a little harder, make you have to process what's going on a little more. I think that could have deepened the impact of the movie greatly.
Did you read the manga by any chance from Seven Seas? Because they had gotten to that point already and stuff like that.
I have not read the manga.
They mostly adapted everything just to let you know, so there was only so much.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the child sexualization that is rampant in the manga, and I have to say more of that. Apparently, the mangaka pushed for more of that to be to be present in this recent film. There's a joke in the movie about Reg getting an erection that you could really tell the movie staff didn't want to do, but it got in there. It's there for all to see.
Oh boy.
And that's one of those things where I see it and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I know he's a robot. I know he's kind of supposed to be like Astro Boy and all this stuff, that he's like really a person, stuff like that, even though he's a robot. But really, do we have to go there and stuff like that? Like, I think it's definitely forced when you see those moments. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's,
and it takes you out of the movie. Like, there are things they do that, yes, they're graphic, but they're impactful. But when you have something like that, it takes you out of the moment, and it doesn't really need to happen. And it makes you think, do I really want to continue on with this series or this movie? And I know what you mean. And I haven't done the manga as much as the anime, just to let you know. So that's concerning if that's more rampant in the manga.
Yeah, the impression I get is that the manga has this much ickier feeling to it. I know with the first season of the anime, they did a fairly good job of just kind of brushing off certain things as a joke, or kind of toning things down, or just focusing on things that are supposed to be more harrowing, or sort of enhance or deepen the impact of what's going on. The staff had a really good sense of that. The movie does seem to veer a little more towards the more chaotic nature of the comic. You know, there's that, but it is still very good, very recommended. Made in Abyss sucks you in and you can't stop, even if you find some of the content in it to be vile. That's what makes it what it is.
Yeah, no, they got the full experience, and as you said, it's like, I think you could only get that done in film for the graphic nature that they had to show for that arc and stuff like that. I don't know how you would do that in a TV show. And just to quickly mention, the other one I mentioned was just the third Fate Stay Night movie, Spring Song. And I think there's been enough written about how great it was to just finish off that Heaven's Feel arc that just like Made in the Abyss, that third movie. I don't think you could have done that arc on a TV screen or anything like that. You had to do that as a film trilogy just because of how graphic, especially the second movie was. The third movie, I was lucky enough, I went and saw it in a theater, and it was a great popcorn movie.
Fool.
Hey man, I'm still
alive.
UFO table, great fights, and a great finish to probably the most. That one was just a trip to say compared to all the other arcs. Very graphic.
The test came back negative, right?
I'll be honest. If it wasn't the fact that it would have been a 3-hour round trip, I would have went too.
Curse you, Dr. Bonnie Henry, for doing the responsible thing and closing all theaters in British Columbia right before that movie came out. I am hoping that Aniplex will have a second screening for this movie sometime in
Same.
the spring.
Same here.
Because with Aniplex, there is not going to be a digital option, at least not if you speak English. You will be able to see this movie subtitled in French in the Canadian version of Wakanim at some point. So if you speak French and subscribe to that service, good for you. Yeah, it's either see it in a theater or pay $100 for the Blu-ray.
I
Choose
think we're
wisely.
going to be seeing the Blu-ray before seeing it in theaters again, but there's always hope. A lot of people have voiced their frustration saying, could you bring it back again? So we'll see if the overlords from Japan will allow Aniplex USA to do that.
All right, Kevin, we'll move on to you now.
All right. So, my selections will all be manga because I rarely watch anime nowadays.
Well, la-di-da.
Yeah, I generally watch anime with other people nowadays, and that's a more difficult thing to do in our current climate. So, as a person who regularly follows Weekly Shonen Jump, it's really interesting to see how the magazine is trying to adapt. Especially now, you had so many long-running titles and popular titles end over the past 12 to 18 months. So you had titles like Demon Slayer and The Promised Neverland and Nisekoi and a couple others just ending, which meant that a lot of titles had to come out to replace them. So these three selections are some of those newer titles, actually, that either started last year and ended this year, or they did start this year, give or take. So my first title would be a little comedy title called A Gravity Boys. Because Gintama finally ended in Shonen Jump, there has been a flurry of comedy manga that have debuted in an attempt to take its place. And for me, I think A Gravity Boys does the whole absurdist comedy routine the best. And so this series is about 4 young men who are sent to space to look for a new habitable planet to live in, but then they find themselves in a planet that's pretty primitive, and they also realize that they can't go back to Earth because Earth is swallowed up by a black hole, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh.
These 4 men, or I guess I should say boys, have to now live out their new lives. And it's really interesting to see just the antics that they get into and the delusions that they get into and how they play off one another. And you have all these silly setups that happen. Like you have one character named Chris who's very effeminate, the girly boy, and because the guys haven't encountered women in quite a while, they start to look at Chris a little funny. And this is a joke that gets old, to be honest, but it's pretty funny the first time around, I had to admit. And then you start having all these fantastical elements that come into play. So you have this godlike figure that kind of appears very early on who messes with the main characters, giving them chances to explore other planets and to help them figure out how to navigate their new landscape, all to his own amusement. And you really, how do I put this? It's really just a lot of fun. And it's also very, very dumb as well. It's really the kind of dumb humor that I tend to enjoy. It's a lot of fun. I don't think it's doing too well in the magazine right now. It seems like the current popular comedy title in Japan is called Me and Roboco, which is about a young kid and his Doraemon-esque robot maid, but I'm hoping that it pulls through. It's been going on for almost a year now, so there's hope. There's hope that it'll continue for a little while yet. It seems like Shonen Jump titles are being given a longer leash nowadays too, so we'll see. For my second title, this one is a little more familiar with manga reading fandom nowadays. It's a little title called Chainsaw Man. I don't know if any of you have read it or not, though.
I will admit no.
Heard of
No.
it, but haven't read.
I haven't read it yet.
Oh, really? Interesting. So Chainsaw Man is a very hyper-violent series and also features a dumb male protagonist who, truth be told, he just wants to live a happy, peaceful life and to have a girlfriend. So the thing is that Denji he's always poor in health, and he's poor and he's hungry, and he gets himself caught up in a situation where he finds himself about to die, but then he ends up forming a contract with a devil called Pochita, and by them fusing together, he can become the Chainsaw Man. So he can just route chainsaws from different parts of his body, and you can imagine how bloody these chapters can get as a result. It builds a fascinating world in the sense that eventually Denji becomes employed by this Devil Hunter Association, and you encounter these cast of characters who really, I don't know how to put this. It's very they're sort of one note, but then you learn to appreciate the different characteristics of each character. But at the same time, you quickly learn that you shouldn't get too attached to these characters because Tatsuki Fujimoto loves to kill off his characters. Truth be told, there were a couple characters who I grew attached to, and then they just die 5 chapters later, and I think wow, that didn't take very long. And I also think that he builds a very powerful villain in the form of, I guess it's a bit of a spoiler, but you meet certain characters who seem like they're saviors, but you just have this feeling that they're not all what they seem, and they play that up very well later on. And you also have the situation where you have different characters come and go, but then certain characters do stick around. And I think for me, there's a character named Power who is she's a very popular character, and it's funny because she's a very crass demon, and her and Denji have this very playful relationship, and you think, oh, maybe they're both kind of quasi demons, maybe they'll fall for each other, but they don't. And you know what? It's nice to see that kind of platonic relationship that benefits both people. I have to say also with the art, it's crazy. Lots of violence. There are several how do I put this? There are several iconic scenes in Chainsaw Man. So one of them is where you see Denji in this kind of tornado-esque scene riding a shark devil while fighting this enemy. What? And I just think, yeah, it's nuts. My third choice is one that unceremoniously ended this year, and yes, I am talking about Act Age.
Oh boy.
Oh boy. Yes.
Yep.
So on
Guilty.
On the Anime Roundtable, I talked about how I kind of know how Mike felt when he found out about what happened with Nobuhiro Watsuki, because Mike, for listeners of Zannen, Mike loves Rurouni Kenshin, and
problem for me is I found out about that long after the fact. So
yes.
The shock, because I was just coming back into podcasting at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
The fallout had long happened, and it was a fallout-ish, but that's another story altogether. Sorry.
So with Act Age, I would say prior to its cancellation, it was my favorite series in Shonen Jump at that point. And Act Age was a bit of an atypical Shonen Jump series where it features a female protagonist, which is very rare in Shonen Jump. The series is mostly about acting, which also doesn't tend to be a topic that comes up often in Weekly Shonen Jump. And not only that, you have a female character who is not sexualized at all, has a good personality, has a interesting personality, and you kind of see her as a person who comes from almost nothing because she has no parents to support her, and she has two younger siblings that she needs to support. And you kind of see her, because she likes acting and wanted to pursue that as a potential career, she goes out and goes to auditions, and she gets spotted by this one director who thinks that she has the potential to be something great. And you see this girl, whose name is Kay. She's slowly kind of, through numerous auditions and circumstances and trying to figure out how to navigate this world, you see her progressing through her career. And now she hits different roadblocks, but she usually will find a way to act her way out of the situation. So you do have those little bits of tension and those moments of thinking, oh, like, how is she going to get out of this? Another great thing with Act Age is the cast. And Act Age reminds me of Hikaru no Go in the sense that you have a bunch of people that are in the same profession or doing the same sport or that play the same game who obviously want to usurp one another and want to be the best. So that's how it kind of relates to Shonen Jump. But there is still that camaraderie there that, sometimes they will help each other out, or sometimes they will give each other bits of advice, or sometimes if someone's in a tight spot, they'll try and help them out. And you don't always, I guess you do see that in a lot of different titles in Shonen Jump, but I guess it feels a little different in Act Age for me. And it just really hit home. Like, I just think that it was just so well executed. It just kind of felt different enough that it really stood out for me. And I think it took a lot of people by surprise because this was one of those Shonen Jump series that they released 3 chapters, but then they chose not to continue it, but it persisted in Japan. It did not get canceled. It slowly built its popularity, and then
you're talking about the English Weekly Shonen Jump release on the app.
Yes.
Or the online service, and they only did 3 at first, but then it came back and was included in the regular rotation. Because at that time, not every title from Weekly Shonen Jump was being simulpubbed.
Yes.
Service. Now, 2020 marked the first time that every title in Weekly Shonen Jump is being simulpublished in that online service now, though. So,
because once Ayakashi Triangle debuted was when every single title was being simul-published, yes.
Worth noting about Act Age is that I think it's one of the only Weekly Shonen Jump titles in quite a while, where that was illustrated by a woman.
Yeah.
It's been, there's been a lot of controversy lately how the editorial staff of Weekly Shonen Jump is a complete boys club, which has enabled some very negative behavior, which also is why Act Age no longer exists. The news was fairly widespread that the writer Tatsuya Matsuki was arrested for sexually assaulting middle school girls on his bicycle and pleaded guilty to it as well. And the response was he was fired. The series was canceled. Not only was the series was canceled, and also all published everything that had been published related to Act Age previously has been wiped off the face of the earth. You cannot legally obtain Act Age in any form anymore, whether in print or digitally. It's gone forever.
It's limited to the secondhand market, and if your retailer happened to still have copies, then they're still there. So for Canada, Volume 1 did come out, but
yes.
Indigo never did stock Volume 2, whereas in the USA, yes, it got pulled from most places. Well, actually not most places. Right Stuff pulled it, and then Viz does not acknowledge it anymore. It is still in like Barnes & Noble. Volume 2 did make it out to Barnes & Noble, so I'm still trying to figure out how to procure that book.
I would imagine that like any copies that are still on store shelves is probably by mistake. I think Viz, I believe their intention is to fully recall everything. But if you can hunt it down, I mean, grab it. It's going to be worth a lot of money. But as I was saying, the artist, the artist of the series, Shiro Usazaki, one of the very few female artists in a Weekly Shonen Jump title. I'm kind of amazed at how few female mangaka are featured in the magazine. I can't think of another recent one who has shown up, because, like, again, there's all this controversy about the boys club of Weekly Shonen Jump editorial, who enables certain questionable people to keep coming back over and over again, or other people like Watsuki, the artist of Rurouni Kenshin, continuing to get high profile exposure despite the whole child pornography thing that was going on with him. There's certainly like a negative culture of enabling there of boys club, but it still amazes me that, like, in most magazines, at least some of the artists are women. And it just so rarely happens with Weekly Shonen Jump. And, like, you go to, like, Jump, even Weekly Shonen Jump's sister magazine, Jump Square, it has a better record of, like, female mangaka. I think even some female editorial staff. Young Jump is a completely different world, despite the fact that, it's the type of magazine that has gravure photos on the cover. They have had female editors and female mangaka, but Weekly Shonen Jump specifically seems to have this problem, and you keep getting this controversy after controversy coming up. And it's unfortunate that this happened to the artist.
Fortunately, there's a new one-shot coming out soon, and she's drawing it.
Oh, she is doing a new one-shot. That's good.
Yeah. Act Age was very special, and I don't know. We'll see how long it'll be before I find that special title in Weekly Shonen Jump again. And because I do love Ag Gravity Boys, but it is a very silly work. So I'm looking forward to see what comes out, because there is a lot of good new stuff coming out in Weekly Shonen Jump lately, like Sakamoto Days, and over in Jump Plus you have Spy Family and you have Kaiju number 8. So yeah, future's looking bright.
So I will quickly give my 3 items. So the first one I want to bring up is an HBO Max animated original series, quote unquote. Not really, though, because it was a series that had been part of another animation block that was planned for TBS back in 2017, but was scrapped because that block was supposed to be headlined by a show by C.K. Lewis, and we know what happened with that guy. Yeah. Close enough. The new animated series by J.G. Quintel, who is the creator of Regular Show. So it's an HBO Max exclusive in the US. In Canada, it's on Netflix. Not only is it on Netflix, it's branded as a Netflix original, which I find hilarious that AT&T and Warner would let that happen.
Why am I not surprised?
Their big competitor brand their show as a Netflix original outside of the US. Crazy, really.
I wonder, are there any other outside markets that Netflix is doing that show in, I wonder? Because that'd be funny.
There are other markets outside of Canada. It's on TV in some other markets. It's not consistent everywhere, but in quite a few markets it's labeled as a Netflix original. So close enough. At first appears to be more down to earth and realistic than Regular Show. It's about a young family. The parents are in their 30s. They have a daughter in kindergarten, and they live together in a duplex with a divorced couple who's still living together. So this sounds more down to earth than Regular Show. It is actually even more bizarre and surreal than that series was. The way the episodes escalate into complete insanity is just beyond anything I can describe succinctly. It also, for all that insanity, it actually really captures living in Los Angeles really well. I have to say, I think probably 1/3 of all media ever produced probably takes place in Los Angeles, but it's very rare that you have something that really captures what living in Los Angeles actually is like. And this show does a good job of that, with just the struggles the characters have, and just the day-to-day life of living in that city. It paints a really great picture of that. And for anyone who's in their early 30s, even if you don't have kids, it is horrifically relatable at times. And also the show is it's amazingly laid back in its depiction of drug use as well. And I don't just mean in like depicting what it's like to be high on certain substances, but it just the actual use of drugs is very like open and accepted in a way that I found really surprising. And of course, it does get extremely trippy at times. That's really where the appeal lies. Also, one of the characters is voiced by Jason Mantzoukas, and he actually is Jason Mantzoukas in every way. The husband of the divorced couple they live with in the duplex. The show is it's 16, 15-minute episodes, but they're compiled into 8 half-hour episodes. And despite having been shelved for 3 years and just kind of shuffled around with no clear path on where it was going to go, with eventually landing on HBO Max, it has been renewed and will be getting a new season. Probably not next year. I would expect this probably in like 2022. I'm really looking forward to it. Close Enough, I think, is the funniest thing that I watched this year. It's really easy to get into and digest. I've actually been meaning to watch it again, and I don't rewatch things very often, especially in a short period of time. But I can't wait to dive into this one again because there's so much I've already forgotten, and I want to experience again. I guess you guys have not seen this show.
I mean, I just pulled up a couple of images, and saw like a bit of the preview on my phone. Well, it's not for kids. It doesn't look
it is not for kids. It is.
It's definitely not. Yeah.
I mean, it's a very like it's really down to earth and kind of heartwarming in some ways, despite how completely bonkers it gets. It's not a mean-spirited show at all.
Okay.
But it is absolutely a show for adults. And I mean, it's very much a sitcom too, but it differs from a lot of what you'll find on like Adult Swim and stuff in terms of tone. Actually, it's quite comparable to Tuca and Birdie, if you guys have seen that show.
I haven't, but I gotta see this.
Yeah, I recommend Tuca and Birdie. That was one of my recommendations from last year as well. Okay. Tuca and Birdie, mercifully, if you have not followed the news and only listened to my show for some reason, Tuca and Birdie is getting a second season on Adult Swim in 2021 because Netflix canceled it. So yeah, you have that to look forward to. You have another season of Close Enough to look forward to as well. I recommend both of those shows. They have a lot of the same vibe, and yeah.
How often does the cast interact with the homeless?
There's at least one episode that focuses on homeless a bit. I can't remember exactly. Well, for instance, the first episode features British street urchins, which is not a realistic depiction of the homeless.
Oh God!
But it's like this perfect intersection of, again, LA life and regular show style surrealism taken to a whole new level.
Okay, then it must be a pretty accurate description of LA then.
Yeah. Yeah, again, it captures that LA vibe really well. It's surprising. It's one of the things that gives the show a really unique voice.
Okay.
My second selection is an anime. So this wasn't necessarily my favorite anime of the year, but I think it's the one most worth highlighting. I have lamented on this show quite a bit how we have seemed to have gone past the glory days of short anime that's 5 minutes or less, that seem to make up a huge part of what you'd find streaming back around like 2015 or 2016. Yeah. But we had one really good one this year called Extra Olympia Kyklos. Extra Olympia Kyklos is based off of a manga by Mari Yamazaki, who is best known as the artist of Thermae. But this one focuses instead on the Greeks. There's a very similar premise. It focuses on a guy named Demetrius. He is a vase painter and sculptor and total loser who lives in the village of Tortonia. And he hangs out with a dolphin who is better than him at everything. And despite having this perfectly chiseled Grecian physique, which of course Mari Yamazaki is well known for appreciating that type of character design.
You bet.
Yep.
Despite having this perfectly chiseled physique, he hates sports and physical activity of any kind, and yet he is constantly being pressured by the mayor of his town to come up with a sporting event or join the Olympics in order to raise the profile of Tortonia. And this keeps escalating throughout the series to the point where they actually eventually start their own event that is a rival event to the Olympics themselves. This is because despite his hesitancy to entertain the mayor with these innovations, he keeps getting transported forward in time again, just like in Thermae Romae, where he encounters like this old man and his family in post-war Japan, and they show him these trivial little modern innovations from the time, and he brings them back and gets around and finds novel ways to develop sports or things related to sports that in ways that are completely unexpected by his peers in the past. And they keep raising the expectations, and to the point where like the stakes keep going up, and he has to keep going back to the future, coming back over and over again. And eventually, as he goes forward in time as well, the modern segments keep moving forward to the point that they get to the 1964 Tokyo Olympics, which he unwittingly participates in. And of course, all sporting events in this show are nude, of course, as is accurate to history. A lot of anime that ran this year was victims to delays or postponements due to COVID-19. Extra Olympia Kyklos might be the most tragic case of that, because not only was it postponed for several months, it started in the spring season, but then after about 7 episodes, it got pushed back and it was not completed until the fall season. There were a total of 24 episodes. So not only was the show itself postponed, but the entire reason that this show was likely made was postponed entirely, because it is very obvious that this show was made to tie in to the Tokyo 2020 Olympics. In fact, it actually ran as an interstitial on a primetime show in Japan. It wasn't a late night anime. It was actually during normal people viewing hours.
Oh.
Yeah.
No, I remember they said it was to tie into the Tokyo Olympic Games. It was kind of tying into the old original Tokyo Games and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's the nostalgia for the 64 Tokyo Olympics is a huge part of the sensation around the upcoming Olympic Games in Japan, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And the mangaka, like, she was the perfect one to do it, like, based on her past works. And it was a great series of shorts, what I watched. And if you still want to watch it, it's still on Crunchyroll, so.
Oh yeah. It's, the whole thing is on Crunchyroll. I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. When Thermae Romae was running, people always compared it to an Adult Swim show, because it kind of was in structure in a lot of ways, and in style, it was a really cheap Flash animation kind of show that reminded people of the cheap Flash animation that ran on Adult Swim back in like 2003, 2004, like Aqua Teen Hunger Force and those shows. But Extra Olympia Kyklos is also very much like an Adult Swim show, maybe even more so, but it has a much more unique animation style. It's actually a kind of a mixed media project. All the Greek characters you see in the past are in claymation. They all look like Greek statues.
Wow.
When he travels forward in time, it takes on this unique kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It kind of looks like cutout characters being moved around, but it's, just a really fancy digital animation, really. Like the quote unquote modern characters are animated in a completely different style, but it all blends together really seamlessly. This series was done by a studio who I don't think has ever done any anime before, called Gosei Studios. It was directed by Ryo Fuji, who I didn't have time to do a lot of research on this, but as far as I can tell, he has never worked on any anime before, let alone directed one. So this is definitely a unique kind of project. I think the thing I like about this show, or the thing that I always liked about every episode the most, were the karaoke segments, at the end, being sung by Onerous the Bard. He'll sing about like some weird little, piece of Greek historical interest with like totally accurate karaoke style graphics running on the bottom. The best one was when he sings about Hermas, which are those like those statues that are just like a head, a flat panel, and male genitalia positioned near the bottom. And it's just like, he'll just do a whole little song about something like that as the ending themes. They're all great. This show is absolutely fantastic. And yeah, I recommend going back and watching the whole thing.
I did it. But obviously Yamazaki-san has made news in many good ways.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if you like her style, obviously it's a no-brainer to think about it.
Yeah.
This one I think I will check out at some point because I love Thermae Romai.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I checked it out based on Thermae Romai, and I was not disappointed. I also knew, like, based on the art style, it's definitely going to be different there, and I had heard that it was going to be in a more traditional Japanese time slot because of the tie-in to the Tokyo 2020 games. So I'm like, this will be interesting to check out because you don't get many of these. They don't come around that often. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's very rare. Also, just side note, Netflix is doing a new Thermae Romai anime as well.
Yeah, we talked about that when we were looking forward to, and looking at the image, it looks like it's going to be more traditional, the animation, stuff like that. But the thing that's of interest is Mary Yamazaki, I believe, the creator, she's going to do some new stories for it. So that'll be interesting.
Yeah, I haven't read the manga. I understand it goes in quite a different direction in the last half.
Correct. They kind of, I think the manga is still going on at that point, but it does go in a very different direction. There is, I guess it's not too spoilery to say, there is a love story with Lucius and then this female character, and it goes a certain way till the end, a very happily ever after sort of story, but that's all I can say. I don't want to spoil too much. In case you do want to go and see it, it's out by Yen Press if you do want to get those volumes, the complete series.
Knowing Mari Yamazaki's own interests, it is not surprising. The fact that the series goes in that direction is not surprising at all.
Yeah, no, not surprising.
Yeah. So, the final piece of media I want to highlight, I think, is one of the most important pieces of media that has come out in 2020. It's still ongoing. It is a webcomic. Now, webcomics are interesting because I've always kind of been of the opinion that while many talented people work on webcomics, and a lot of them are very good, to me it's always kind of represented the failure of the Western comic industry, that they've become so vital for people. It just shows that, we can't accommodate as many artists in our system as they can in, like, Japan. But webcomics let you do things that you can't do in official press or quote unquote legal press. And this particular webcomic, I think, embraced that in a way I haven't seen in a long time. This webcomic is called Mr. Boop. So, Mr. Boop is written by Alec Robbins. He's a TV writer. He works on, like, the Eric Andre show, and some other stuff related to Absolutely Productions. Basically what it is a self-insert webcomic that he writes about himself being married to Betty Boop. And
wow.
This series is maybe the greatest work of blatant copyright infringement I have ever seen. So he not only is married to Betty Boop, he works with Peter Griffin and Sonic the Hedgehog at Subway. There's a storyline that goes on later on where Sonic the Hedgehog goes to jail because he tries to kill them because they refuse to have a threesome with him.
Oh.
There's one segment later on where Mickey Mouse goes on about copyright infringement while holding his erect penis in his hand and masturbating. Like, in spite of all this insanity, most of the comics are just, like, end on anti-jokes. Like, the main character saying something like, wow, that's what I was hoping he wouldn't say that. Like, some lame sitcom stinger. When I say something is fourth wall breaking, that doesn't sound very special anymore. There's no fourth wall in this comic. He is constantly finding innovative new ways to break the fourth wall with the way the comic works. Like, a huge factor of this is the fact that he is writing about his own life and talking about the idea that he is actually totally married to Betty Boop in real life, and she loves having sex with him, and that what he's writing in this comic is an accurate depiction of his own life. And the way that it just keeps going back to that and poking into that divide between what is happening in his real life and what he's depicting in the comic reaches several levels of brilliance. I don't want to spoil this too much. You can go to mrboop.net and read all the existing chapters of this so far. It will not take you very long. Apparently you can also purchase the 3 books, 3 of the 4 books that these comics have been collected in as well. I don't know if he should be making money off of this, but I'm glad.
I was going to say, someone's going to come after him, aren't they?
That's what I was thinking. Like, he's
Probably not Sega
by now.
They don't care, as we know with Sonic fan games, but I'd think Disney maybe.
Wow.
Okay, I'm sure Eric Andre will protect him. As you can tell, I'm having difficulty describing this thing. You just have to go check it out. It's just taking this idea of self-insert fan fiction to terrifying and brilliant levels. If you read it, you will see it is one of the greatest things produced in this quarantine era that we live in right now.
Wow.
And that's that. Mr. Boop. Go read Mr. Boop right now. It's the best thing.
I think I will.
Wow. Just looking at some of these images too.
All right. Well, that's everything I have to say about that. Obviously, you guys have not read Mr. Boop. So before we wrap up, anyone have any? I was going to ask if you guys have any big holiday plans. What am I saying? Of course you don't. No one's leaving the house. Yeah, you better not.
Dinner for one.
Well,
yes.
Just to say, we are both. Well, all 3 of us are in lockdown zones in Ontario. So unfortunately, we're not supposed to go anywhere.
Yeah.
I'll be doing.
I'm not sure about you, Jesse. If you're in color-coded land as well, or if you're in a zone which says you can't go anywhere.
We can't go anywhere. It's all everything. It's bad. Everything's bad.
Yeah, just a couple of holiday Zoom meetups for me.
Yeah, I'm doing that. So
yeah, no virtual holidays and stuff like that.
Yeah, virtual stuff.
Trying our best.
I mean, I'm in touch with my family regardless, and I'm in touch with friends. So yeah, this is been a rough one, and that goes without saying. Just there's a degree of restlessness, and yeah, it's nice. Like as we're taping this week, vaccines have been approved, but this is still going to be a while.
Yep,
we're going to be here for a little while longer. Let's face it. And some of us who were furloughed or otherwise laid off, there's still some waiting. There's a bit more of a waiting game there, but. All you can really just do right now is just stay hunkered down and stay safe. There isn't really too much else to add.
Well, if you want some positivity or something like that, I can tell you the story. A few days ago, I was walking my new puppy, and we were going in just under an underpass for a road above. Someone had put this bag, and it was actually filled with Christmas bulbs and stuff like that. And they had a note and said, if you want to write a message or something like that, you can put it on the bulb and then hang it on any of the different trees along the path. And it's grown to all these different bulbs on all the different trees. None of the wildlife is touching. Some of them have different messages of positivity and stuff like that. And it looks very festive and holiday-like and kind of gives it a different feel and gives something, you know what I mean? Some people some hope or something different instead of looking at the same maybe 4 walls every day, right? So.
Well, yes.
I think when you see that around, and even in our small localized areas, when we do have to try and go out.
Well, to be positive, I've spent much of this whole pandemic catching up on watching and reading different things. And thanks, Jesse, because you recommended Wave Listen to Me.
It's a good show.
I can't recall too many shows that had laugh out loud moments for me. I found myself laughing quite a bit.
Now, that is a fairly mean-spirited,
that's
adult-oriented animated show. But again,
it has some really, really funny moments, and you're wondering if the main character Minari is going to kill somebody. And considering who the creator is,
good old Samura.
Yeah, and if you
see the right
stories, it kind of has the same feel to some of his short stories he's done for Slice of Life, even though most people remember Blade of the Immortal.
That was having a lot of fun. So I'm just catching up on my viewing and discovering shows that maybe are much older, as I mentioned in my 3, So there's the blessing in all of this. As I said, you just make do. You just make do with what it is. And just try and make yourself better, or just do things that are just plain good for the soul, which is a phrase to use. So.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're going to leave it at that. And yeah, thanks guys for coming on. Could each of you please just take a minute to let people know where the folks listening can find you on social media or online in general? Mike, can you go first?
Okay, so as I said, we are the trio, 3 of 4 who do host Anime Roundtable. Obviously, you can find that wherever you get your podcasts. Also, we are on Instagram and Twitter, although the Instagram is hardly ever used, but we're there on both at Anime Roundtable. That's just one word. AnimeRoundtable.com is the show's archive, so you can check up all the past episodes. Now, on a personal level, I'm on Twitter as well, at Okina Blue. Like Kevin mentioned, I am a Kenshin fan, so that's where you can find me. And I admit I don't post too much, but that's where you can contact me, or otherwise hail me, and hope for a couple more follows in that sense. Oh yeah, I guess the email address, if you want to go old school, animeroundtable@gmail.com. That's how you can contact us. Anything Anime Roundtable.
Okay. And James?
Actually, I'm the oddball of the group. I don't have any social media. I'm like the anti-social media. So if you want to contact me, you're going to have to find me yourself or send me a letter.
Yeah, he talks a lot about
You
snail
wouldn't
mail.
give out your address, though, which means no one will contact you.
I guess I'll just have to get a P.O. box.
Or send it to any one of us. We'll forward the threats and love letters to him.
But it's kind of funny because it's like I talk to people, I do use like Discord and all these other things, but it's just social media hasn't done anything for me. So it's like I just haven't gotten into it, even though I know it's like people are saying, well, you don't have social media. It's like, are you a hermit?
No, you made the right choice. Trust me.
And yeah, in many ways, you're not missing anything. This is good, James, that you've managed to avoid it for so long, dude.
Yeah. I go by BusterBlader126 on Twitter, and that's about as much as I want to share on social media.
Well, thanks for listening, everyone. Thanks for tuning into Zannen Canada. You can reach me on Twitter at jbetteridge or email zannencanada@gmail.com. The theme song is by Ultraclystron and can be found on his album Packet Flood, and you can find that at ultraclystron.com. You can subscribe to this show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever your podcast app of choice is. I also have a Ko-fi account, ko-fi.com/Zannen Canada. I do lose money making this show, so if you do like what I do, please consider giving a contribution. I'd really appreciate it. So to everyone locked away in your homes, or whatever you're doing right now, I guess, Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays, Happy New Year, whatever you do, take care. See you again.